Hello, and welcome to another edition of Atlas Information Live. I'm your host, Atlas Alex, and I'm happy that you are have taken the time today on the Sunday to join us here as we take a deep dive into a quality which, unfortunately, let's say, is not exactly heralded as a great virtue as it once was, certainly in the West and certainly online. We have a culture of self-obsession, really, and uh, people feeling the need to be seen, to be heard, to be exalted, to be revered, uh, to be at the very least validated. And there are many, many aspects of this self-obsession, self-absorption, right down to the concept of the selfie. But also platforms like TikTok and YouTube Shorts, the vast majority of videos on there are taken with people take them with the selfie cam on their phone, and they're just videos of people ranting about whatever it is that's troubles them and that they feel the need to be heard. They feel the need to profess their frustrations with the world or what have you. And there is an entire industry, if you will, of well, there's always been an industry of celebrity, of the cultural idols, music idols, television, film, and sports. And since the advent of the internet and social media, that cultural phenomenon of idolatry has migrated online into this cottage industry of influencers. I mean, that's such an interesting name given to just normal people who start up on social media or on YouTube, and they gain a following. Often, not always, but often through a process of generating a great deal of uh, rage-based content or outlandish content. So the crazier, the more off the wall, or the angrier, the more the better. The more controversial, the better. The more political, the more tribal, etc. And the industry around online influence and influencers specifically, the business model is all about getting a following, number of views, number of clicks, number of audience members, number of followers, likes, subscribers, etc. And many of these influencers create a kind of cult of personality around themselves and around their channel. And so the business around all of this demands or encourages an attitude which is focused on the idol, on the influencer, on the movie star, on the musician, on what have you, because the business model is all dependent upon numbers of followers and viewers, etc. So the numbers game plays into this cult of personality and personalities that are larger than life. And the more people are exposed to culture on this level, this frenetic hunt for more and more and more exposure and followers and etc., that creates an atmosphere of self-obsession, of self-absorption, and of self-expression. The question we need to ask ourselves is, which self is behind all of this? And you may have noticed I have a lovely collection of young Buddhist monks in the background today. And you can imagine why I chose this image when devoting today's talk to humility. You notice that there are no cell phones. These young monks, they're not holding phones down there in their lap. They're, of course, all meditating, and they are seeking that deep and meaningful conscious connection to that true self, which is ultimately no self. And that spirit of selflessness that goes along with that true self, that's its nature. And right away, when we start conceptualizing humility, we can go straight to the source of the absolute, abstract spirit and essence of selflessness. No self. There's no self-aggrandizement, no self-obsession, self-absorption. It's pure selflessness. Giving, sacrifice, the focus on others, on creation itself, and pouring forth that selflessness into that creation to see all the myriad ways in which that spirit of selflessness can manifest within and through an infinite number of selves, and what that spirit of selflessness must overcome in order to express its true nature. So it goes without saying that humility is one of the prime virtues that relates to this manifestation of selflessness, this notion of selflessness. Because if selflessness is giving of oneself and sacrifice of oneself for others, selflessness puts others above ourselves. In other words, we're sacrificing ourself, our ego, our desires, our wants, our aches and pains and frustrations and everything else. And we going that extra mile for others. We're going to be, as we did last week when we looked at intention, we're going to be looking at words, and the word that we're going to be looking at, of course, is well, let's pick this one. It's well, let's just get it out here. Humility. Okay. And we're going to be going step by step. Now, one of the interesting things about humility is this prefix. Let's just start with hu. Now, in esotericism, this is the primordial sound. This is the first sound of creation. Hu, the absolute breathing the universe into being. And I'm not sure from which tradition that arises. I just know it from Gnosticism, from esotericism, that this is the primordial sound. Hu. You may notice that that also happens to relate to the word hue, which of course relates to light. And we'll come back to that in a moment. But if we take all three of these, whom, that primordial sound, hu, combines with the M, which is the mantra of the sexual organs. So the primordial sound of creation combined with, so the primordial sound combined with the chakra of creation, the sexual center, we get hum. Now, this is Sanskrit, and it means, so let me write this down. Sanskrit, hum means fire, and it means protection. It is what we find in mantras like Om Mani Padme Hum. That's the mantra of mind protection. Then the mantra of Christ. So the fire that is down below, that is born, but is also related to the fire that the phoenix, the Christ, the destructive and creative aspects of that fire. But that fire, of course, is also in the earth. So in Latin, let me just double check the spelling on this. I don't want to get this wrong. So the Latin, yes, okay. Yeah, I just didn't want to spell it the Persian Arabic way, because it's hummus, not in Latin. It's humus. Okay, go away. Go away. Okay, so that's Latin, and that, of course, that means earth. And when we think of the fire that's in our earth, in our body, that's the fire of the sexual organs. That's the sexual force. That's in the ninth sphere of Yesod on the tree of life. That relates to that hem, M, the mantra M. So the thing about the earth and the ground, because that's the other meaning is ground, is that it's low. It's literally low to the ground. It is what supports everything. It upholds everything. And it is beneath everything. It is certainly beneath the heavens and beneath the stars and beneath the sun. But it is also the primordial matrix from which the fire and the creative force can manifest and bring forth the divine Hu, the divine Hum. This is creation. So it's important to make this connection right from the get-go, that what's lowest has an inherent and intimate connection with what is highest, and that there's a relationship between the primordial Hu that emerges from the absolute. Because Hum in Sanskrit, it is a syllable, it is a mantra, as in Om Mani Padme Hum. But the Latin earth, ground of humus, or humus, not sure the pronunciation, means that earth, according to the Hermetic principle of correspondence, as above, so below. Just as the Hu, the primordial word, the sound, the vibration, and the light emanates from the absolute and creates that way, the earth likewise, in this level, everything on this planet grows from the earth. It grows up from the earth. But not alone. Not alone. There's another element to this M of the sexual force. In Hebrew, that M is mem. Don't ask me to write the character, but it's mem, right? And mem, that sexual force, is related to the waters. Now, the interesting thing about water is that from the standpoint of alchemy and tantra, the fire is in the water just as the fire is in the earth. That's number one, the fire of the sexual waters. But let us contemplate these waters just for a moment. And to do so, let's turn to Lao Tzu and the Tao. In the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu refers to water as perhaps the best, as a representation of ultimate humility. And it is a perfect analogy for water, for humility. Water is the perfect analogy for humility because, number one, water has no attachments. Water has no ego to demonstrate. It has no label to live up to. It has no wealth to show off. Water occupies, literally and figuratively, the lowest places. Water doesn't seek approval or recognition. And anybody who's ever had a leak or water pouring into the basement or something knows that water does not ask for permission. Water flows, but it always flows down unless it's under pressure, and there's exceptions to the rule. But generally speaking, water falls. It flows down. Water does its own thing, so to speak. And yet, it benefits everything. Practically everything on this planet requires water for life. That's why when we look for other planets, we're looking for planets that have liquid water. Those are the best chances of those planets supporting life, or at least life as we know it. Another interesting thing about water occupies the places no one else desires to be in, the most uncomfortable, tight spaces that would shrink our ego, that we'd have to make ourselves really, really, really small to fit into. But water doesn't care. Water stays the most humble, down to earth. And it goes into every crack and nook and crevice, and it goes as low as it can, right? Without striving to be the contrary. This is where our ego is realistically where we should be. So we have in this word humility, just in this prefix, of whom, we have the foundations of not just the word humility, but also humanity. And of course, human being. I want to read you a quote. Where we go. Lao Tzu writes, he whose desires are few gets them. He whose desires are many goes astray. Therefore, the sage holds in his embrace the one thing of humility and manifests it to all the world. He is free from self-display, and therefore he shines. From self-assertion, and therefore he is distinguished. From self-boasting, and therefore his merit is acknowledged. From self-complacency, and therefore he acquires superiority. It is because he is thus free from striving that therefore no one in the world is able to strive with him. For Lao Tzu, humility was the virtue, the fundamental virtue on a path to exaltation, of becoming one with that universal source and spirit and essence of selflessness, which, as I said, is selfless. This is why they say pride cometh before the fall. That even though the actual sin of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden was temptation by the serpent, it was lust. What they crystallized through that fall is that how Eve tempted Adam and how the serpent tempted Eve was pride. That if they eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, they too will be like the gods, knowing good and evil. And that idea that to be like a god and have that power and have that knowledge, that desire to exalt oneself and put oneself up on a pedestal and put oneself up at the level of the gods. That's the pride that cometh before the fall. And that's what Lao Tzu is intimating at, of all these people that are striving to attain, to achieve, to become. And they're trying and they're striving and they're working hard and they're doing everything. They're doing all the best practices and they're grinding it out. Hopefully you can begin to see the connection between this week's talk and last week's topic on intentions. Because you can't be grinding it out and striving to exalt yourself and reach a high place or gain followers or gain fame or fortune and become a create a cult of personality around yourself without having the intention to do so. And all of that grinding and hustle culture, right? That's another thing that we can talk about. This whole hustle culture and grinding it out and setting your intentions and even manifesting your desires and all that stuff. It's all self-obsessed. It's all self-absorption. And the intentions there, the grinding uh, and striving and the hustle culture, like we were discussing last week, that's intention. Intention. That's stress. That's grinding and stretching and straining. Why? To try to exalt yourself and put yourself up on a pedestal. Get yourself to the next level. But in that quote from Lao Tzu, he says it's the opposite. The opposite is true. And we can see that, for instance, in the story of Gautama Buddha. He was born wealthy. He was born in a palace. And he left home. He abandoned his kingdom. He abandoned all of his wealth and his family and his titles and his birthright. And he, of course, became the bodhisattva of compassion that we all know, the Buddha that we all recognize, and came to that enlightenment and that knowledge and that wisdom that has permeated for generations and generations ever since. That the highest self is no self. And that's what these young people behind me are practicing and learning to become one with by getting themselves out of the way of this spirit of selflessness within. That is worthy of exaltation, first and foremost, but doesn't seek it. But it's that love, that spirit of selflessness, that if we allow it to flow down into us and fill us up as a vessel, then if we too can be overflowing with that spirit of selflessness, we can pour it forth into the world. And that's that water. We become a fountain. We become a spring, a wellspring of the waters of life. Again, that near perfect analogy of the ultimate example of selflessness, which is why water is the life-giving substance. It just gives and gives and gives and gives and gives. And it flows wherever it needs to go. And it flow as low as it needs to go. And as I was describing earlier, into every nook and cranny and crevice, it doesn't, water doesn't say, no, 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 that crevice is, I don't like that crevice. It's too small. It's too uncomfortable. It's too tight. It's too this, it's too that. And that water will flow and saturate the earth, the humus, the hume of the earth. And in that saturation of the earth, of the ground, we get fertile soil. And again, from that fertile soil can be born so many of the life forms that give us life, all of our fruits and vegetables, and that give us shelter, and so many aspects of the natural world, of the natural environment that we call home here on earth. But it's that selflessness, it's that humility that is inherent to those elements that gives them that life-giving power. And that gives them that tremendous value, which, of course, we take for granted most of the time. But for someone who's lost in the desert, wandering in the desert, boy, does potable water become the most valuable thing to them. Our priorities change when circumstances change and our environment changes and so forth. And then we turn and we if we come across an oasis or a well, we drop to our knees and we pray to God and we thank God for this life-giving gift of water. Because that water is a manifestation of that whom. Because the life that water gives is the fire inside the water. It's that same fire that's in the sexual waters that can create life within us. It can also create the solar bodies. It can create the solar vehicles of our higher self. Because that water contains that fire, that hume, which is born of that primordial voice, that primordial creative force. Another famous individual from history, Socrates, was also famous for being very humble. He didn't have any possessions. He wandered around Athens just in the robes that were on his back. And one of the reasons why he is such a profound figure in Western civilization, Western history and philosophy, was because he sought no accolades or exaltation or position of power or authority. And one of his most famous axioms was, I know that I know nothing. And he would engage in conversation with just about anybody, no matter who they were, or what position they held, or what status they were. And he he took modesty as he was like the epitome of modesty. His focus was on self-discovery and the search for wisdom. And of course, in the end, he was condemned for so-called corrupting the youth of Athens, and they poisoned him. But one of the things that we must understand is, pride and hubris has always been a feature of civil society, of this fallen humanity. I mean, it's not by accident that Homer's Odyssey, Odysseus's tragic flaw is hubris. It's pride. Pride cometh before the fall. It's one of the, if not the greatest sin, greatest of egos. I mean, pride literally equates to the eye of ego. That's what pride is. And pride is the antithesis. Hubris is the antithesis of humility. So it follows that if humility is one of our greatest strengths, then its inverse, its antithesis, would represent one of our greatest weaknesses, one of our greatest obstacles. I prepared a slide. I just want to walk you through this. If I can get all of this going here. Okay. So let me share that. Oh, no, let's just do that. Okay. So how can we work with humility? Is there a way that it's all well and good to be looking at the words and linguistics and looking at it in those terms, but is there a way we can visualize and comprehend the practical metaphysical power of cultivating humility, of being like water? And as you know, I've talked often and always about the alm of life, the analogous ultimate methodology. And what I like to show you now is humility's role in that. So if we begin from a baseline, where we are at, the analogous ultimate methodology states that in order for us to move up from this baseline, to ascend, if you will, to the next level, we must first descend. Why is that? Because of the spiral nature of the pattern. Sorry. We descend, and there, in that lowly position, from that low position, we face whatever it is we need to face. But we've taken ourselves down a notch in order to meet whatever challenge we've been faced with. And we take ourselves down a notch, which means it's not I that I'm going to face it. I'm not I that I'm going to overcome it, but I humble myself. And in that humbling, in that humiliation, I open my mind and I open myself to new information, to new knowledge, to new approaches, to new wisdom, to new ways of being. And where do you suppose they come from? Not from our ego. It's the lowering of the self, the act of humiliation that gets the ego out of the way. And what flows in, right? Like Buddha said, empty your cup. Why meditation is about quieting your mind and emptying your mind in order to receive information. We empty our cup. Humiliation is emptying our vessel, our mortal vessel, of our false self, our preconceived notions, the trends, the habits, the ways of thinking, the ways of doing that we keep bumping up against the wall. They're not serving us. And the challenges that we face, the old ways of doing things, or the present, the ways we do things now. In other words, the self that we identify with and are attached to, and all of our beliefs and opinions and mental frameworks and all of that. If we descend, if we take ourselves down a notch, embrace humiliation, empty ourselves of that which doesn't serve, as we descend into some kind of hell, into some kind of a challenge that requires new and novel and brilliant approaches. We need to make room. We need to make space for that inspiration and that imagination and that insight to be able to flow, come down and flow into us and through us into the world. And as that happens, well, then we face and overcome the challenge, and then we rise back up. But when we rise up, we're now greater than what we were before. And why is that? Because what flowed into us was from a higher place, was from our higher self, our true self, our innermost essence of selflessness that is connected to all beings and the source of the universe, of God, who can handle any challenge and is here to handle the challenges for us if only we humble ourselves. So from this next higher position, we'll face a new challenge because we have to keep moving forward. So what do? Well, we descend again to the next lower level. And again, we humble ourselves. We face a challenge, and now this challenge was even greater than the challenge before because we're even deeper into hell. We're at another level. But again, this greater challenge at a deeper level challenges us and invites us to lower ourselves even more, to go even lower. And as we do so and make more room for inspiration and insight and imagination from our higher self, from our divine nature, from our innermost essence, the spirit of selflessness, and we lower ourselves into be a servant of our innermost, and we overcome that challenge, we face that challenge, and then we rise. And when we rise to a whole new level. Benjamin says, Scripture seems to have anticipated the condition of our present society. But mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying its power. Have nothing. When we look at the world today, it is difficult not to recognize many of these qualities unfolding before us. There seems to be a profound lack of humility. Indeed, pride often comes before a fall. Yeah, well, this is, of course, spot on. And I'm assuming that this comes from the book of Revelation, but that I may be wrong. But certainly, this is a prophetic verse from the Bible. And as you said, Benjamin, it's spot on. It's exactly come true. And what's interesting is that in each era, individuals who read this verse in the Bible assumed that it was talking about the era that they were in. Because again, according to the Alm of Life, it's whatever level that we are at is what's normal for us. But there's that descent, and the downward spiral has been happening in this humanity. We're in the Iron Age, so the downward spiral has been going for 2,000 years. Well, a lot longer than that. But so people have always seen the degeneration around them, and so when they read this verse in the Bible, they just naturally assumed it was it was referring to their own time, certainly during the fall of Rome or during the collapse of other civilizations since then. But now we are witnessing, it's unquestionable that we are in the midst of a collapse of Western civilization. I mean, I wrote a book about it, right? I mean, what in hell is with us? It's the whole topic of my book is the collapse of the global civilization, the collapse of humanity. The four signs of the Great Awakening, as I called it. So, and since pride features so prominently in that collapse, again, it just highlights the importance of embracing the path of humiliation, right? And people think of humiliation as this bad word, this bad thing. I'm saying, no, it's as we've been looking here, and Master Samael, a quote that I love of his, he says, if pride cometh before the fall, Master Samael says, every exaltation is preceded by a great humiliation. And that's what we've been looking at here. A humiliation which precedes an exaltation. And this is, the Alm of Life is the way, the only way in which anything and everything advances, develops, evolves, grows. Whether it's your skills on the piano or your muscles in the gym, the development of anything requires this the law of the pendulum, the oscillations between ability and inability. In other words, When things become too easy, life throws us a new challenge, and then all of a sudden our abilities aren't enough anymore, and we crash. We're halted, we're challenged, we're stopped dead in our tracks. And that's the time, right, to take ourselves down a notch and put ourselves back into learning mode, to be childlike, to be teachable. It's a teachable moment. I'm sure you've heard that expression. When we encounter something that's a teachable moment, well, in order to be teachable, you have to be humble. Someone who's haughty and full of pride, you can't teach them anything. They think they know everything. But that's why I brought up Socrates, who says, well, the one thing I know is that I know nothing. It's that humility, and that keeps us low to the ground and keeps us grounded. You've heard that expression before. To get your head out of the clouds and come back down to earth, where we are teachable, where we can we go back to the beginning. Every revolution of the Alm of Life is a heroic journey, right? It's the hero's journey. It's descending into the dungeons, or going on the adventure, descending from the known world into the unknown world. Because really, that, when you think about it, in terms of the heroic journey, the Alm of Life, that's what we're doing. We're crossing the threshold from the known to the unknown. The thing about a teachable moment is that there's something we need to learn. There's new knowledge that we must attain, because knowledge is power. And if we are encountering a problem, a test, a puzzle, a conundrum, well, in order for us to solve that problem, we need the answer. We need the solution. And again, interestingly, coming back to this idea of humility and water, isn't it interesting that water, among all the other qualities and virtues that we gave to water, water also has the power to dissolve. It can dissolve, i.e., obstacles in our way, right? Great mounds of earth, water can dissolve them and wash them away, clear our path. In fact, high pressure water, you've used high pressure washers on your car to get off the grime in the dirt and to make your vehicle spotless again, right? It's a high pressure water. It's able to dissolve and clean. And the other thing that we can say about water is that when something, a solid, is dissolved in that water, the water becomes a solution. That which has been dissolved in the water and by the water is said to be in solution, which is exactly what we're looking for when we face a problem, when we face a challenge, a test, a trial, an ordeal, a conundrum, something that requires an answer, that it requires a solution. Well, how do you create a solution? It must be dissolved in water. And what is water? The perfect ultimate representation and analogy of humility. You see, humility is the superpower that can dissolve the challenges and the problems that we face that are testing us. Because when we face those challenges and those problems, the prayer, the approach, the attitude to have is, I am not qualified. I am not qualified. And when we do that, we humble ourselves, we bow down, and we raise up that problem, and we hand it off to our innermost being, our true self, that essence of selflessness within us, who is qualified. And we take ourselves down a notch. We turn over our cup. We empty out our cup. We empty ourselves of our selfishness, our haughtiness, our pride, our self-aggrandizement, our self-importance. Instead of looking at the problem and say, I am going to fix this and I am going to solve this and I am going to do this and that, and my cleverness and my intelligence and my power and my contacts and my money and me, I'm going to take the bull by the horns, right? And I'm going to hustle myself through this problem. I'm going to grind out the solution, and I'm going to keep putting my nose to the grindstone and grinding and grinding and grinding until, God darn it, I'm going to beat this thing. Right? We set that intention, and then we live our lives in tension, in stress, grinding away. And compare that to shifting to this challenge that I'm facing. This is above my pay grade. And this visualization gives us a meaningful, practical way of comprehending that. That as we face a problem, another challenge, which is invariable, it's going to happen. It's the only way we can progress. We say, this is above my pay grade. Why is it above my pay grade? Because I lower myself down. I take myself even lower to meet that problem. I sacrifice myself. I achieve a new level of selflessness, in other words. And in achieving that new level of selflessness, going to greater depths of humility as we go deeper into the hell of challenges and struggles and conflicts and problems and trials and ordeals that life throws our way, and great humiliations that life furnishes us with, that our Divine Mother lays upon us. These are opportunities. These are learning opportunities, teaching opportunities. So that we can embody and receive. And in that embodiment and reception and service of our innermost essence of selflessness, now we rise back up above, having left behind, having discarded whatever ego element of pride or greed or lust or habit or thinking or whatever needed to be annihilated in hell through that humiliation ritual. We now rise to a whole new level of selflessness and a whole new level of ability and capacity, because we have allowed ourselves to be filled with the waters of life, which can now flow through us. And rising tides float all boats. Because what's true of water is that water always flows down and is humble, but it can. But when we amass, that water accumulates and amasses, and then it rises up. The water level rises up, and it floats our vessel upon those waters. And again, we arise back up with the solution because that which needed to be dissolved is dissolved. It is now in solution. Now, just to be clear, this visualization, this step by step, right? It translates out to this. This is what normally people think of, the ups and downs, but slow, steady growth over time. This is what life, when we are progressing, looks like. This is what these ups and downs look like. Except my purpose was to be able to show it and to show how we get there and why. And that using the Alm of Life, we see that those downward trends, they're see, this is a little deceptive because this shows that, well, we just go a little bit down and then we go, a lot up and a little bit down and a lot up and a little bit down and a lot up. But the reality is that it's like this. But at the same time, so when it's shown this way, the way most people think of progress in life, the downward swings are, again, they're minimized. And it's important for us to know that the reality of the situation is that this path is difficult, and that to reach the next higher level, you must go to the next corresponding level. That is what the Alm of Life shows us and teaches us on the spiral path of growth and development. But having said that, we are never handed a challenge that is beyond our potential or capacity to handle. At whatever level that we are at, yes, we will have to descend, we'll have to humble ourselves even more and take ourselves down another notch. Yes, that's true. But it's a systematic process. It's step by step by step. And it just means that the higher we rise, the deeper we have to go in order to get to the next level. Fine. Again, you can understand this easily in terms of video games, role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons or Diablo or any of these computer role-playing games where you have a character and your character advances in levels, like World of Warcraft. Well, to get to the next higher level in your character, you have to go into the next deeper level of the dungeon, and you have to face more powerful monsters. But it's never a problem because you're advancing level by level by level by level, right? So when you start the game, you're at level 1. You don't jump into a level 20 dungeon because you'll get slaughtered. No, you go to a level 1 dungeon. And then when you clear out the level 1 dungeon, you go up a level. So now your character is level 2 or level 3 or level 4. So now you can go into a level 4 dungeon because that's your level. And so it's always matched this way. That's what the Alm of Life shows, is that yes, the drops are larger, but so is the rise. The humiliations and the exaltations are matched, and they're commensurate. It's the same thing when you go to the gym. When you first start going to the gym, you're maybe lifting 10 pounds. You don't go right away to the 100-pound or 200-pound bench press. You start lifting what you can, and then slowly but surely you make progress. That's what we're talking about here. But it's so Because of that, when you visualize it this way, that's what this is showing, is that it never feels like you're being overwhelmed because of the progress you made before. So whatever challenge you face, that's why everybody draws it this way and understands it this way. Because yeah, when you're in the gym, and you're lifting 50 pounds, you don't go from lifting 50 pounds to lifting 100. You go from lifting 50 pounds to lifting 55 or maybe 60, right? It's called incremental progress for that reason. But it doesn't change the fact that you're now lifting that amount of weight, or you're facing that depth of challenge. But it's just that you were prepared for it. So it doesn't feel as overwhelming as it would have as a jump from 10 pounds to 50 pounds. So the reason why this is important to make explicit is because because the ego is very clever and wants to be in control of everything and wants to dominate and wants to take charge. You know this, right? And so it can intellectualize and rationalize a process of seeking humility, and the ego will find a way to turn humility and the search for humility into its own kind of pride. So I'll give you an example. In ancient Greece and Athens, Epistephus, I believe Epistephus was among the philosophers, and he tried to mimic Socrates by basically looking like a homeless beggar. But he wore these tattered, ratty old cloaks, and he went around Athens putting on airs about how humble he was and how modest he was and how he had transcended all materialism and all worldly concerns. He was so modest and he was so humble that he didn't care what people thought. He didn't care about how he looked and dressed. And so this was his claim to fame. This was his shtick, Pistaphus. And Aristotle one day in the forum famously said, Pistaphus, we can see your pride through the holes in your cloak. So this is something to be aware of, that ego can find a way to wear humility as a badge of honor, as a badge of pride. We have the expression false modesty. We also have cases of people who seek out humiliation. And this, of course, there's an entire, I don't know what you would call it. Well, we wouldn't call it a school of thought. You would, there's an entire community, if you will, of individuals who seek to be dominated. That community refers to itself as BDSM, right? We're talking about sexual degeneration now. We're talking about sexuality. and fetishes. And there's an entire community out there who organize themselves into one of two camps. And one of those camps, their kink is to be dominated sexually, to be tied up, to be, and all sorts of other things. And so to be told what to do, when to do, how to do, and to be disciplined, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to be put in their place, to be humiliated. And then the other camp, okay, obviously, if you have a camp of people that want to be humiliated, there's another camp who gets off on dominating and gets off on humiliating others while these people find each other. So it's important for us to be aware that humility may be a virtue. It may be one of the greatest virtues, and it's certainly a necessary virtue to cultivate, a necessary attitude, a necessary approach to the path, as hopefully is crystal clear, certainly in terms of the Alm of Life. We have to be able to descend and ascend. But make no mistake, the ego will find a way to use this path and to use this virtue to its benefit. Like Epistephus, he was filled with pride, but he was walking around, he was proud of the fact that he was the most modest and humble philosopher in all of Athens. And he wore that as a badge of honor. That was his brand. That was his shtick. Whereas genuine humility would rather be unseen. It would, it doesn't make a big show of its modesty. That's what modesty means, right? Like humility is, you can't, if someone is showing off how humble they are, they're not humble. They're a peacock. They're a narcissist. They're a show off. That's the antithesis of being humble. So for someone to exude or want to express their humility and somehow make an impact or make a point on others about how humble they are, and you see this a lot. You see this all the time in different ways. So we have to be aware of that. We must be on guard and not allow our pride to take advantage of our humility. And this is, when you meet someone in that position, or if you experience that yourself, you'll understand, you'll know why, and you'll understand how subtle a game that is. But it follows from that, by the way, that even if you are modest and humble and you're not a attention seeker, maybe you're kind of shy or an introvert, you're not an attention seeker. You know how else pride comes and takes advantage of humility? When we quietly, modestly, not making a big show of it, not letting anybody else know, when we quietly and covertly and secretly look down on others, especially those who are narcissists and peacocks and proud, And we are not. We are humble. We are modest. We keep to ourselves. We're not attention seekers or, we're not like them over there. And then if we look down on them, there's a great cartoon from the 80s. I don't know if you remember Garfield, the cat, the overweight lasagna eating cat. And he had a famous line. He says, "It's hard to be humble when you're as great as I am." Um, Another way in which pride, specifically mystic pride, develops around humility and exploits and takes advantage of humility and uses humility as a foundation, as a pedestal to look down on others, to look down, oh, look how, so uh, someone who's constantly taking selfies and putting them online, or making all of these like self-absorbed, self-obsessed videos, TikTok videos, and putting them online on their or social media and whatever, and you're constantly encountering this kind of content from that person. If you observe yourself and you find yourself looking down on them or being judgmental, or saying, "Oh my God, she's such a narcissist," and "Oh my God, she's so full of herself," and "Oh, and there's another selfie," and "Oh, she's taken another photo of herself in the mirror with this makeup or that makeup or new hairstyles or this or that, the other thing," and she's like, and then you find but this is an inner dialogue. This is not, you're not making a show of anything out there, but this is happening in your own psychology. Rest assured, that's pride. That's mystic pride. Anytime that we are judgmental or looking down on others and secretly judging them within what we believe to be the privacy of our own mental space, but we don't realize that we are sending out negative energy, judgmental energy, and that we are judging and condemning others on the mental plane. The lords of karma see that, and we are feeding pride, right? So whatever our understanding of humility is, and whatever our preconceived notions of what modesty is, we have to be prepared, again, to take ourselves down a notch. Or as Yoda said, we must unlearn what we have learned. We have to be prepared to empty our cup and allow for a more robust and voluptuous and comprehensive understanding of humility to flow into us, to wash away any rationalizations and intellectualizations and preconceived notions we have about what it means to be humble, and how it's hard to be humble when you're as great as I am, and allow us to see humility as a child, right? As these young men meditating in their youth, to again, it's a teachable moment. This is humility by being humble towards humility itself. To be so humble, to take oneself down such a notch, to say, I'm not even sure, or I don't know what humility is, what true humility is, but I'm willing to learn. Mother of mine, father of mine, you who are my true being, teach me, show me, show me the path to true humility. Fill me with that selflessness. Pour it into me like the humble waters that always seek out to be lowly, and yet they are the givers of life, so that I may pour forth that selflessness to others and give forth that power of that water, the power to dissolve, the power to be in solution, the power to give life and everything else, and the power to float all boats and everything else that water does and is able to do, while never asking anything in return, and never uh, never concerned about itself, always concerned about how it can serve others. That's like water is constantly seeking an opportunity to be absorbed, including into the earth, including into the ground, the soil, but also plants and animals. And it's constantly undergoing that process of oxygenating itself, and the whole water cycle that, again, it's very much like the alm of life, right? The water rises up, and then it falls, and then as it falls on mountains and it flows down streams and rivers, it becomes oxygenated, becomes that much more life-giving, and then that flows into the ocean and becomes that rich oxygenated matrix of the oceans, in which there's such a tremendous abundance of life. And all the minerals, all the salts that it dissolves are along its path along the way. That's why our oceans are salty. That's all of that salt is in solution. Well, it's the waters that dissolve that, as they kept seeking to go lower and lower and lower and lower, and to um, and just allowing themselves to be taken by gravity, and to go with the flow, literally to go with the flow, in order to fulfill its life-giving purpose. It's that humble act of being selfless, of being selflessness, being humility. But not making a big deal out of it, and not expecting others to validate it or even notice it or reward us for it. It's just, it is what it is. Let's see. If we consider the life of Jesus, certainly the life of all of the prophets and saints, but the life of Jesus um, is without a doubt the greatest example of humility, because what could be lower? What path could be lower than dying for the sins of the world? And suffering the humiliation, the torture, the crucifixion for the sake of the world. And insofar as that was the case, it was that humility that created the groundwork. That descent into hell from Golgotha, from Calvary. When Jesus died on the cross, he descended into hell. In other words, he went as low as you can possibly go, lower than even the water can flow. And the result of his humility was that 3 days hence, he rose from the dead. He arose from hell, a resurrected master. He went to the deepest of depths. And that's why he was able to rise to the highest of heights, a resurrected master, a living God, the Christ, the Son of Man, the Son of God. But his life was a life of service and sacrifice. This is what Buddhists refer to as the path of the Bodhisattva, a life of suffering and sacrifice for humanity. It's a life of ultimate humility. It's a life of the dissolution of the self. And again, that dissolution comes by way of the waters, the sexual waters. Because when you combine water and fire, i.e., you bring water to a boil, the capacity of water to dissolve is increased exponentially, but so too is its capacity to crystallize. And Master Samael had this great line that he would often use. He said, in order to dissolve what must be dissolved and to crystallize what must be crystallized, our water must boil at 100 degrees centigrade, right? The boiling point of water. At that point, right, we make everything from coffee to and tea and everything else, right? So it dissolves, but also you can form crystals. I don't know if you ever did that when in elementary school or in high school, where you did that experiment of boiling water and dissolving salt in boiling water, and then taking thread and immersing it into the boiling water and allowing the salt to form around the thread and crystallize, and you'd pull it out and you would have these crystallized forms on the thread. So that's the power of water, to both dissolve and crystallize. But it must boil at 100 degrees. That's the combination of fire and water. That's that hum in Sanskrit. That again is the foundation of humility and of human being. And when we talk about dissolving and crystallizing, once again, it's not a stretch to see this visualization and understand the descent and ascent is something is being dissolved in order for something to be crystallized. That's another way that this is another way to visualize what we refer to in alchemy as transmutation. Turning lead of the humans, turning the lead of ego into the gold of the human soul. And we can understand this process from that alchemical point of view. That from wherever we are right now, observing ourselves and comprehending an ego, and we have the capacity, or our divine mother can dissolve for us an ego that we've comprehended. So we've gone down into hell and we've explored and comprehended that ego. And then upon doing that, our divine mother can dissolve that ego. Again, there's that word, dissolve. with the waters, the fires and the waters of sexual alchemy, of white tantra. That ego can be dissolved. And then what can be crystallized is the free consciousness and also the solar bodies. The solar bodies of the monad. And then this process repeats. And we go to new depths within ourselves and identify and explore and face and comprehend other egos. And this is how progress is made. That other ego is comprehended and dissolved, and more consciousness is freed. So again, the Alm of Life applies to every single process of becoming, of being. And that includes alchemy, that includes the dissolution of the ego and the crystallization of the solar bodies, the vehicle of the higher self. But that first step has to be lowering ourselves, taking ourselves down a notch, but not so much that we make it a point of pride, and not so much that we make it some kind of a fetish or something, because people who seek humiliation, and so an example of that would be, the medieval monks. They used to have they used to flail themselves, they used to whip themselves, believing that voluntarily inflicting pain and suffering on themselves was a way to atone for their sins and was a way to purify themselves. We mustn't make this mistake that we can use some sort of artifice or some kind of ill-advised process of circumventing the wisdom of our Divine Mother, who is orchestrating the events in our life and furnishes us with all that we need on the path. We mustn't believe that we can do better than her by preemptively causing ourselves humiliation and suffering, and lowering ourselves, like whipping ourselves with a whip. That's not the path of the Bodhisattva. That's, even the Buddha said to his ascetic colleagues, the yogis, when he first abandoned the palace and he went out into the wilderness to seek enlightenment, he basically connected and joined a group of ascetic yogis. And they were all about self-deprivation and, fasting for long periods of time. And they were, extreme asceticism, in other words. They would live in cold caves without fire, without any clothing, and they would meditate on the top of a mountain, even in the middle of the rain and everything else. And so this extreme asceticism, this exposure to extreme forms of deprivation and brutal suffering, these ascetic yogis believed that this was the path to enlightenment. And it was in meditation that Buddha realized, it came to him, the insight that this was not the way, that the way was the middle road. There was a balance to be had, and that what these ascetic yogis were doing was an equivalent to that striving, that grinding. It was a kind of a strange hustle culture, but one that's associated with asceticism and esotericism and mysticism, where you force yourself to sit in the lotus position for 12 hours a day, doing nothing, eating nothing, doing nothing, saying nothing, but meditating. Well, that's an extreme kind of grind, right? That's a spiritual grind. That's a mystical grind. That's what that is. And you will find that individuals who pursue such paths, they develop quite a bit of mystic pride around their abilities. So I'll give you an example of this. Have you ever heard of the man named Wim Hof? Wim Hof. He's a well, before that, Benjamin said, yes, if you boil seawater, you'll get salt crystals. Yes. Um, so Wim Hof, maybe I can pull up one of his YouTube videos. He's this he's known as the Iceman. And now I don't know if let me just okay. So I'm going to put this on here. So this is Wim Hof. I think he's Norwegian or he's from some Scandinavian country, and he's famous for being called the Iceman, for being able to go in the Arctic, like you see him here. This is yeah. Eduardo says he's the extreme temperature and weird breathing exerciser guy. Yeah, well, well said. Yeah. So now here's an example of someone who, on the surface, you look at him. Wow, he must be, very humble. He's very modest. He's going in the Arctic without any clothes, and this is what he does is he practices a kind of extreme form of asceticism, extreme breathing, and uh, and and he has trained himself to be able to endure extreme temperatures for extended periods of time and so on and so forth. However, you will notice that this little montage about him is people have made videos about him. They made documentaries about him. He's a YouTube influencer. He sells courses. He teaches people his method, the Wim Hof method, so that other people can master their body and master their senses and their ability to handle extreme climate, extreme environments, and so on and so forth. And he combines with meditation and all kinds of like Eduardo said, breathing exercise and everything else. But make no mistake that Wim Hof is a business. He's an influencer, and he takes great pride in, I don't say exactly boasting, but boasting, marketing himself and talking up a storm about his method and what it's able to do and how it will transform your life and the benefits you'll get from it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, in recent years, he ran into quite a bit of controversy because of the extreme nature of these activities and these practices. Some of his students ran into problems, and I believe he himself ran into some major health problems. So he's he's not invincible. He's not immortal. The Wim Hof method may allow him to like, there he's running in the desert, right? Extreme heat, extreme cold. He's an ultra marathoner that runs like ultra marathons in north of the Arctic Circle or whatever. Okay, I'm sure that Benjamin would be able to produce from the same section of scripture that he shared earlier, talking about the end times when everybody is going to be boastful and unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, hubris, all that stuff. In or around that same part in the Bible, when they talk about in the end times, there will be many who can perform miracles, and many who can perform great wonders. Okay, Wim Hof falls into that category, but the Bible warns that these people are false prophets. They're false prophets. They're false messiahs. They promise the world. They promise, unlimited health, unlimited abundance, no more pain, no more suffering, no more psychological torment, no more anything else, right? And you can run ultra marathons in the Arctic. Right? These are great miracles. These are great feats of nature. These are just great wonders of nature, right? But these are false prophets. They're filled with pride. They're filled with hubris. I'm not. We don't want to sit here and judge him as such, right? But it's an opportunity to learn. And true to form, let me just hang on a second. Let me just get out of here. True to form, Benjamin is on point when he says, "For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall shew great signs and wonders, insomuch that, if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect." And Supin Kashper says, he fired his own brother. Definitely stone cold businessman. Okay, so you see here what Buddha saw, Gautama Buddha saw in the ascetic yogis way back thousands of years ago. And he said, no, this is not the way. These guys are filled with pride. They're sitting there 12 hours a day, right? In the sun, in the rain, in the cold, starving themselves, trying to get enlightenment or whatever. But secretly, they're all like saying, "Oh, I'm so spiritual. I can live for weeks without food." And Buddha recognized the very clever and insidious trap that was. And it's a trap that Wim Hof, he's maybe in the beginning, he had, again, the best of intentions. But whatever those intentions were, he's now just another influencer. Here's a look at the okay, see, look at the titles on some of these. Superhuman, right? And they say, becoming superhuman. And then Wim Hof, they're lying to you. They want us to be sick. So like he's 67 years old, and look, the superhuman world of Wim Hof, like it. The significance of this, the significance of. No, I want to keep that title on the screen. The significance of that title as it relates to this line of scripture, which I knew that Benjamin would be able to find it like that, because it's one of those lines of scripture that once you read it, it sticks. It's embedded in here. Why? Because everywhere we look, everywhere we turn, especially on YouTube, especially in this influencer world, this looks maxing and health maxing and maximize this and maximize that and longevity. And remember a long time ago now, I did a live stream on that the Johnson fellow, the guy who wants to live forever, right? The longevity maxing, right? Brian Johnson. And so we just live in this world where everybody is so fascinated with efficiency and maximizing efficiency and maximizing benefit for the minimum amount of effort. And then we have these clickbaity titles, right? The superhuman world of Wim Hof, the Iceman. Is this what it means to be superhuman? Is that what it means to be superhuman? Oh, I should play this. Is that a superhuman that can um, do these things that Wim Hof can do? But then he fires his own brother or whatever. And he's on like talking and boasting about all this wonderful things and how people can change. Is this going to make people happy? Is this going to solve the problems of the world? Because they can do these they can show off these great signs and wonders, right? That's very deceptive, because for the average person, they go, wow, he must be such control of his body and his mind and emotions and so on, right? Like, yeah, it's they shall deceive the very elect, because Wim Hof, his following was very much in this kind of new age and the elite new age that are always looking for that edge. They're always looking for that. Remember, they're striving, they're hustling, they're striving, they want the quick fixes, the magic pills, but also superhuman powers and superhuman longevity and et cetera, et cetera. And that's what Wim Hof caters to. But where is the humility? Where is the humility? That's the question. That's the question we should ask when we are confronted by these false prophets who promise us the world and promise us happiness and promise us longevity and promise us, everything that we could possibly want if only we follow their method, if only we buy their book or take their course or sign up for their subscription or go to their workshop or what have you. They're always selling something. Humility asks for nothing. Humility wants for nothing. Um, Again, what Lao Tzu said: he whose desires are few gets them. He whose desires are many goes astray. Therefore, the sage holds in his embrace the one thing of humility and manifests it to all the world. He is free from self display, and therefore he shines. He is free from self display, and therefore he shines. He's free from self assertion, and therefore he is distinguished. He's free of self boasting, and therefore his merit is acknowledged. Free from self complacency, and therefore he acquires superiority. It is because he is thus free from striving that therefore no one in this world is able to strive with him. Because the alm of life is not striving, it's arriving. It's not doing, it's not hustling, it's allowing. Eduardo says, automation, efficiency, AI, give us your consciousness and live forever while making free money. Yeah. I mean, I there is a interview with Elon Musk with The Economist that I listened to this morning while I was working out, and he keeps he seems to believe that AI and robots are going to usher in a an age of unlimited abundance, and that we're not going to need money, and that everything as we know it is going to change because we're going to be living in some kind of sci-fi utopian future like Star Trek. Because remember, Star Trek didn't have money either. I mean, I think the Ferengi still used money on Deep Space Nine, but I never really got into that show. So, but for the rest of the Federation, you never saw Captain Kirk and Spock, or Picard and Riker and Data like going around, paying when they went to other planets and stuff. So it's this suggestion that enlightened humanities don't have money because whatever they're doing, they live in such abundance that they have no use for money. And Elon Musk seems to believe that AI and robotics are going to usher in that future for our humanity, and he believes it's going to be happening as soon as 10 years from now, as soon as a decade. So I mean, but Eduardo's point is on point here. And Benjamin says, I agree with Eduardo's point. It sometimes seems that in the end, the elites will benefit the most from these AI systems, becoming wealthier and more powerful, while the rest of society risks being left behind with fewer opportunities, less knowledge, and greater economic hardship. It is the AI as we know it, and really they don't know much about how it works. They really don't. AI as we know it simply represents mechanical nature's end game for this humanity. Because when you consider where AI comes from, what it represents, what it does and what it doesn't do, and what it seeks to do, you discover that it's a physical, materialist, technological manifestation of our own egos, of our own ego mind. That's why we call it artificial intelligence. And unfortunately, that's why it saddens me whether to listen to the richest man in the world be so enamored with a technology which is fundamentally malicious by nature because it's mechanical. It has no soul. Efficiency is the euphemism for putting quanta above qualia. We think of humanity in terms of divine nature and mechanical nature. Efficiency puts all of the balance on mechanical nature, puts all of the emphasis on the quanta, right? Quantity. And specifically on the law of conservation of energy. Think about that law for just 1 second in the context of what we've been talking about all day today. There is a mechanical law, a law that governs physical reality and mechanical nature. The law of conservation of energy. Now, think about what we began today's talk with about humility and selflessness and suffering and sacrifice for others. Where does efficiency how does that square with selflessness, giving of yourself, expecting nothing in return, of humility, of lowering yourself in order to raise others up? Where's the law of conservation of energy in there? Because divine nature, the law of conservation of energy, has its corollary in divine nature, which is the law of right application. So, the right use of energy. It's not the conservation of energy, which is getting the most with the least. That divine nature, the only law that relates to conservation of energy relates to not wasting energy, not frittling away one's energy. In other words, through the orgasm or through egos in general, through desire, wasting one's energy by indulging desires, which are mechanical. But the law of conservation of energy is to maximize the energy you take in and minimize the energy you put out. And mechanical nature does that in a mechanical way. Whereas divine nature, right, the path of the bodhisattva, the path of suffering and sacrifice for others, is maximizing the effort that you put in for the sake of others, and you minimize the energy that you frittle away on yourself or that you waste on your desires, on your egos, right? But it's not the law of conservation of energy. It's a law of transmutation of energy, of transformation of energy, of turning the energy that you have into something greater, of giving it to others. And in that process of selflessness, you create something greater, something divine with that energy. That's what art is, music. It takes tremendous amount of effort. Sculptors, architects, anybody in doing any sort of creative, but any vocation of any kind, even a plumber, even a bricklayer, who puts their blood, sweat, and tears and their pride and all their craftsmanship into their work. It takes a lot of energy to do that. Why do they do it? Because they love it, because they're inspired, because they have to, because they have this song inside of themselves, and they have to give that to the world. They have to bring their gifts into the world. The waters of life must flow, and they will use all their energy to see to it, to energize those waters with the fire, and apply the creative process to bring into manifestation in whatever form that those gifts inside of them are meant to take in this world. But that's not how machines think. Machines are governed by the law of conservation of energy. Let me do the absolute minimum of effort possible for the absolute maximum of gain. That's the law of conservation of energy. And it is that cold, mechanical, materialistic quanta approach, which is completely self-centered because it's all based on maximizing for oneself and self-preservation. It's the primal self-preservation instinct. That's why you have, hoarding, for example, a squirrel hoarding nuts for the winter, or an individual who's hoarding because that makes them feel safe, right? It's an obsession. They have to surround themselves with all this stuff, whatever it is that they hoard. But it's that cocoon that they feel safe, they feel secure, they've got their stuff. It's the preservation instinct. It's the law of conservation of energy. It's the law of conservation of self. It's all, which is based in fear. And selflessness, the law of transformation of energy, is based in love, is based in giving. So I'm sorry, but as Eduardo points out here, right? A future that's based on automation, efficiency, and AI it's going to be a dystopian nightmare. It's not going to be a future of consciousness, a future filled with selflessness, where selflessness reigns and consciousness is what people pursue. No, it's going to be the system maximizing based on the law of conservation of energy, which means consciousness and humanity are going to be exploited. That's what the Matrix trilogy was all about. And that exploitation already happens inside of us, and to one degree or another happens outside of us already, because the system is a machine, the big machine. That's already exploiting humanity. It already exploits human and natural resources. What makes anybody think that the AIs are not going to do that? And the one thing that you will note when listening to these elites talk, and people like Sam Altman and even Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, the Palantir guy, they're not very humble. You don't get a sense that they are proceeding through life with a great deal of humility. Their inherent nature seems to be that of a modern day pitchman, one of those carnival were they called callers, carnival callers, the guys with the hat and the cane, who would get up on the soapbox and say, "Step right up, ladies and gents. Come see the, Barnum and Bailey's House of Wonders. Come and see the, the what is it, like the 400-pound man, or the bearded lady, and all of these, these freaks of nature, and all that kind of stuff." Like, now I'm dating myself, but I mean, that's these 19th, 19th century early American carnivals would travel around, and they would have these, these wonders, right? And you'd have to pay admission to go and see these wonders. And usually it was all fake. It was all hoaxed. But the guy out front was saying, "Hey, step right up and come check out Barnum and Bailey's House of Wonders," right? Sam Altman and Elon Musk and these guys, these are the modern day versions of that. Is that what they were called, Ed? They were just called showmen? Yeah, I guess there's even a movie called The Greatest Showman, wasn't there? Hugh Jackman. It's a musical, I believe. I believe it's about the life of Barnum and Bailey, wasn't it? Anyway, it's not important. But yeah, these showmen, but these like showmen, these pitchmen. The other, it's like, just imagine Vince, the slap chop guy, or the My Pillow guy, or all of these late night infomercial pitchmen. Just imagine if you gave them $100 billion or whatever, right? Like, or $50 billion in an AI company. Like, that's what I see when I hear these guys on their interviews and stuff. That's what they are. They're a showman. They're a pitchman. They're just selling, Ginzu knives and slap chops on late night TV. Only they're doing it for billions of dollars, and it's costing humanity its soul. Right? But there's not a lot of humility there in a showman, in a pitchman. Right? There's not a lot of there's no money, to put it another way. There's no money in humility. There's no money in it. There's no money in modesty. There's no worldly success in that sense. If anything, you, on a one-on-one basis, when you meet people and you truly put themselves ahead of yourself, and you truly meet them and greet them from a place of modesty, of simplicity, of, you don't want anything from them. You're if you can help them in some way, you're more than happy to. If you can share with them something, that you're more than happy to, but you're not there to impose anything on them or anything else. Is nobody can feel a threat from you. Then, in that sense, you may win lots of friends, and even some admirers, and people who recognize that you are, that you're an individual of quality, of, virtue, of integrity, whatever. But uh, you will not find humility on the docket in any self-help course, or that's centered around financial success. And even in the new age movement, um, much of the new age movement revolves around manifestation of desires, accumulation of power, accumulation of knowledge, expanding one's mind so that they can have experiences and they can travel on the astral plane. And that's why a lot of new agents and stuff like that, they promote psychedelics and all this sort of stuff, because it's all very me centric. It's all very there. It's humility doesn't sell. That's why it doesn't make any money. That's why people don't promote it. That's why this world doesn't promote it, because it doesn't sell. Modesty is not sexy. It's not exciting, right? It's modest. It's modesty. It's not enthralling or invigorating, or any of these, right? And it's certainly, modesty and humility don't fit into the hustle culture and the grind and the strive and the, beat this world into submission and take what you can get. Right? You got to wring it out. You got to squeeze the world. You got to take the bull by the horns, and ride it, and get it to submit to your will. And you make a lot of money, and you'll be famous, and people will respect you because you'll have money and power, and people won't mess with you because you're a no nonsense person, and on and on. Well, the shtick, right? I don't have to convince you of anything, or explain it, because you've heard it a billion times. And the reason why there are no pitchmen selling humility, there are no courses on humility, there are no books on how to become humble or courses on how to be humble, because nobody would pay for that. And yet, there is no advancement on the alm of life. There is no spiritual advancement without, there is no exaltation without first the great humiliation. There is no circumventing this process. There's no shortcuts, there's no silver bullets, there's no magic pills. Humility is an absolute essential component and virtue on the path of awakening and self-realization of the being. To empty ourselves of ourself so that we can make room for our higher self. To take ourselves down a notch at every opportunity, revolution after revolution of the alm of life, take ourselves down a notch and submit to the will, the insight, the imagination, and the inspiration, and the love and the selflessness of our being, and allow those waters of life to fill us up like a vessel drawing from the spring, the eternal spring of sweet ambrosia. And then we, as that vessel, can take that and pour that out into the world. To be a servant, to fulfill our duty to our Lord and Master, to be a servant, to serve our innermost Lord and Master in His work, in His life, in His mission, which He is unable to do unless we get ourselves out of the way, unless we serve Him as His vessel and His vehicle, His voice, His stenographer, His hands, His eyes. It's right. We are like the Iron Man suit, and our innermost, our creator, is our inner Tony Stark. But we, just like the Iron Man suit, we have an intellect, we have an AI and a personality. The Iron Man suit's AI is called Jarvis. But Jarvis serves Tony Stark. What happens when Jarvis gets corrupted by the Tesseract, by the 4D hypercube, which is sexual energy, by the way? When the negative aspect of sexual energy corrupts our AI, corrupts Jarvis, what happens? He becomes Ultron. And his sole mission in life is to destroy Tony Stark, to humiliate him, to block him, to sabotage him, and ultimately destroy him and destroy everything that he cares about. Now, that's a sobering truth, and that's a hard-hitting mythology, modern mythology. That we all need to spend some time meditating on. And I actually have, here it is. Let me put this on the screen for you. This is a meme that I made, wow, gosh, long time ago now, that juxtaposes Iron Man and Ultron and explains everything I just explained to you. But this modern mythology shows the difference, what happens, and what happens when we are taken over by pride, self-absorption, and um, self-obsession. Because, like, let's face it, Ultron is a he's a narcissist. He's a narcissist. He's a psychopathic narcissist. He is the dark side of Tony Stark, right? He is Tony Stark's ego, embodied, imbued, and blown up, and possessing the Iron Man technology. Whereas Jarvis is modest, is humble. He serves Tony Stark. And so when we talk about taking ourselves down a notch, and before every exaltation comes a great humiliation, think about undoing ourselves from being Ultron and returning to becoming like Jarvis, to becoming just the Iron Man suit, where our personality and our AI intellect, our rational mechanical mind serves our innermost master. And we're able to converse with our innermost master, and we're able to connect with him, and he fills us up, and he guides us, and he moves us. And now we have the capacity to truly be superhuman. Because what does superhuman mean? We, the human, the mortal mechanical vessel, become super when we are filled and when we serve our higher self, our superlative self. This is why Superman has an alter ego of Clark Kent. Clark Kent, who's just the mortal. And he becomes Superman. And it's that iconic shot of Clark Kent tearing open his shirt, and we see the big S under his shirt, because inside is Superman. And all he has to do is take off Clark Kent, and he becomes superhuman. And Superman gets his power from the sun, the Christ. Just like Tony Stark gets his power from the arc reactor in his chest, which is a glowing triangle, a triad, a triunity, a trinity in his heart. All of these symbols are all there. They're all meaningful. And they can all help guide us and point us in the direction of embracing the path of humiliation, to take ourselves down a notch, to embrace the path of the Alm of Life, and to finally achieve the exaltation of a true superhuman, that is possible only when the mortal serves his innermost Superman. And that is a process of humbling, of humility, of humiliation, of taking ourselves down a notch, of saying, I'm not qualified, but I am worthy to serve. And in that service, because our master, our innermost, needs a 3D spacesuit. He needs his Iron Man suit. To be here and now in the physical world, he needs his physical vessel. So are we willing to embrace humility and fulfill and achieve true fulfillment in life? Not to be a false prophet like Wim Hof, but a true prophet. Someone who is simply a vehicle, a vessel, a servant, a voice, a brush, or hands in whatever way we were born to serve. If the only true fulfillment is life is for us to fulfill that service, that role that we were born, and that role of service in whatever form that takes is to serve our innermost master. And that is when we have the potential to be, quote, supermen and superwomen, true human beings, in other words, not intellectual hominids, not mechanical intellectual animals, but true human beings, humanas and being. Three as one, a trinity, a triunity, made in the image and likeness of God. When we, the mortal, are joined in one with our innermost being, and by extension can receive and join and connect with the Trinity, with the Christ and the perfect multiple unity, the being of beings. But we have to know our place in the order of things. And knowing our place is one thing, but being there, putting ourselves there freely of our own volition, of our own free will, and allowing that which wishes to flow through us into the world, allowing that to flow through us into the world by emptying ourselves of our hubris, of our pride, right? If we are so full of ourselves, empty your cup. That's humiliation. That's humility. There's one other word, by the way, that relates to what we've been talking about. You may find this interesting. Humus being earth and ground, and this hume, that also becomes to exhume. That means to dig up or to unearth. So I finished with this just now because that's another way for you to think about why the Alm of Life has this pattern and why we have to dig down and come back up. It's like when you, in Dungeons and Dragons, when you go down into the labyrinth, or when Perseus and Theseus go down into the labyrinth, they come back with the treasure. They dig up the treasure, but you got to dig down before you can come up with the treasure. Like when you're digging for gold, or when you're going to the gym, or you're on your bicycle, or you're running, and something inside you says you want to reach a new personal best, and you have that expression, you got to dig deep. You got to dig deep within yourself, and you draw up that strength from within, that power, that willpower, that light, that fire. You got to dig deep within yourself, and then you bring it to this, you draw it up, you exhume from your earth, from what's in your earth. And what you exhume is that hume, it's that fire. It is that mantra, and the fire in the waters of that mantra, hum, which is in Om Mani Padme Hum. Exhume, right? If the hum is in you, exit it, extract it, export it, exchange it, allow it to become extraordinary, and you become extraordinary. If you bring to the surface and share with the world that which is superlative to you, that is the process to become truly superhuman. Not by being the extreme temperature and weird breathing exerciser guy. That's not being superhuman. It begins with humility. It begins with humility. Does anybody have any questions or comments? When you think about Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, you think about the miners and the dwarves who dig deep into the earth, right? They're small. you it, become like the seven dwarves who are miners to dig deep, right? If you want to dig deep, it makes sense to make yourself small and stout, right? It's like the dwarves of Middle Earth, right? They're not that haughty, snobby elves, right? These tall, majestic, lanky, flowing hair and all of the, there's a little bit of a there's definitely a little bit of the showman, like little preening peacock thing going on with the elves, right? These beautiful elves, these beautiful beings. The dwarves don't suffer from that particular vice, right? Dwarves live under the ground, and they're low to the ground. They live under the ground. That's where they like to be. But of course, then there's the hobbits themselves, who are also small, and they also live underground, and they're very unassuming, right? They're not. Hobbits are that's one of the reasons why um, Frodo and Sam were the ones to take the ring into Mordor, precisely because hobbits are so modest and so humble. They live simple lives, right? And so there are going to be times when you encounter heroes that are these unlikely heroes. Wally, for example. Wally is an unlikely hero, right? And then there are other those heroes' journeys when you come across them, like Frodo and Sam, and of course Bilbo. I mean, in the Hobbit, I mean the book, not so much the movies, but Bilbo and then Frodo in Lord of the Rings, Frodo and Sam, and it is precisely their humility that is their strength. Um, so, think of other films that you've seen that are stories of heroes who are reluctant. I think that's the word, the reluctant hero. The hero who's not looking to be a hero. It's the last thing in the world that he wants is to be a hero, right? And he just wants to live a nice, quiet life, an unassuming life, or whatever. But he's thrust, a great adventure is thrust upon him, or he's thrown into the midst of some great quest. And in the process of that quest, he discovers his heroism. He discovers his inner hero, right? His inner hero, his inner Superman comes out. He exhumes that his true self, his true potential. His hero is exhumed because the challenges that he faces on his heroic journey requires him to dig deep and to go places within himself that he's never gone before, and to dig deep, to exhume from those secret chambers within his own inner world, to exhume his true potential, his treasures, right? And his secrets. So that's something to keep in mind as you go forward and you encounter different stories, different films, and you encounter reluctant heroes or modest, humble heroes who come from modest, humble beginnings and yet end up on an extraordinary journey. Like in a way, that's kind of like what Neo is in the Matrix. Like certainly in the first Matrix film, right? He's pretty unassuming and to begin with. I mean, we can probably think of some better examples. Benjamin says the insights you share today are very similar to what Scripture teaches. Uh, quote, "For whosoever exalteth himself shall be abased, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted." However, in today's society, humility often seems undervalued because so many people are focused on self-promotion, recognition, and success. How can we remain humble when still adapting to the demands of modern life? Well, that is a challenge, isn't it? And honestly, Benjamin, all I can say is put your faith and trust in God in your innermost, and and do not fall for the false teachings of hustle culture, of grind, of this and that, of nose to the grindstone, and you have to do it. That you, Benjamin, are the one who has the potential to be extraordinary, and you gotta make it happen, and it's all you. And this whole like self-esteem, you know, this cult of self-esteem and the cult of like positivity, positive thinking, and all this kind of stuff. Like it's like is trying to force an exaltation of the self, but that's not how this works. If if you humble yourself, if you get yourself out of the way and have patience, your higher self will do the rest. It doesn't mean that you're going to be passive. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have to work and work hard. You will. But what you do and how you do it and when you do it and when you don't do it is not going to be up to you anymore. So all of that will be lifted from your shoulders. As what we were talking about last week about intention. The self-promotion, the recognition and success, that's all tension, that's all stress. So today's talk goes hand in hand with last week's talk. So this is where faith comes in. Um, there's an expression, if you build it, they will come. If you invite God, your higher self, your innermost, if you invite him to take the reins, he will take them. He will guide you. And he will produce for you a fulfillment that no amount of self-promotion, money, recognition, or success can ever duplicate. And since you have family and you have children and so on, you have responsibilities, they will be taken care of. Right? No one's saying you have to like quit your job tomorrow and start meditating all day. No, 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 no. Remember, this process, the Alm of Life, remember, when we work through this process, oops, remember where we started. right? This is the first step. That's not a big step, but it's a step in the right direction. Just humble yourself in one way, one simple aspect of your life, one thing that let go of one thing, pour a few drops out of your cup. And I guarantee the space that you make, it will be filled and it will fulfill you in a new and divine, magical, glorious way. It'll be grace. And once you experience that, you will do this again. and the more you start getting the rewards, the more you empty of yourself and it becomes filled up with something divine, and the more you experience that and the more you feel that, this is going to become second nature. And then when the challenges and the tests and the trials and the ordeals come, and you'll be like, you know what? My innermost has me covered. And you'll know what to do. Humble yourself, take yourself down a notch, pray, meditate, observe yourself, stay aware and awake and present in the moment so that you may receive the solution that's not only going to get you out of whatever the test, the trial, the ordeal that you're in, but it's going to exalt you. It's going to take you to the next level. That what? It's not for comfort and security. It's not for you to sit on your high horse. It's not for you to go and take a vacation. No. It's to prepare you for the next challenge. So, but that's my answer to you. Baby steps, right? Nobody's that's why I said earlier about the gym, right? Nobody's telling you to go to the gym and put 500 pounds on the bar and start lifting it. No. Go to the gym, grab a couple 10-pound barbells and do some curls. That's it. Benjamin says, "Thank you, sir, for that thoughtful answer and for that and for sharing your insights with us today. I found it far more meaningful than listening to pastors who commercialize God's word while still promoting the same grind culture they claim to challenge." Oh, interesting. Well, if it's any consolation, it certainly is meaningful to me, and it warms my heart that that that's the case, that was your experience today. But as you know, these are right. These are yes, these are my words in the sense that they're coming through me. They're coming through my mouth, and I often, you can see me. I'm not. It's not that I'm struggling or striving or suffering to find the words or get the words out. It's that these are not my words. I'm a speaker for Attlas, right? So I've not yet perfected um the perfect flow, right? So I have to receive and then share. And so that's not I don't know how long it'll take, and I don't know when it'll be that where it's just Attlas who just speaks through me, period. And that Attila's not, so much here anymore. But I imagine that only happens after uh death and resurrection. Like that's after psychological death, after many years of practicing white tantra, et cetera, et cetera. That's a Christified master. That's mastery. I'm not there yet, but to the extent that all of these topics, I'm guided to do them, often with little preparation, except for in this case, there was an exception with me doing this PowerPoint. Because I wanted I was told that, you know, to 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 do the visual aid in this way, in a way that so that the Alm of Life can be presented in a way um, that can be translated into what everybody understands as the process of progress. This is how the world understands progress in life. And I just needed to be able to show it step by step and make the connection, because not everybody can understand that spiral Alm of Life just the way it is. So, but this is self-evident because everybody experiences it like this, right? Whether they know it or not. But everybody knows this graphic, right? So, but yeah, Benjamin, if today was helpful for you, then that warms my heart and that makes it all worthwhile. Anybody else have any comments or questions before we sign off for today? Benjamin mentioned pastors, listening to pastors who commercialize God's word. Um, if you, we can think of like some of those televangelists. Joel Osteen, for example, he's got his mega church of what 80,000. Basically it's a stadium church, and he's his own cable network and all this kind of stuff. Um, I don't make it a habit of listening to these guys or watching these guys, but of what I know of them, um, they may preach humility, but I don't see a lot of modesty or humility in them, or the way they live, or the way, or their mega church, or Joel Osteen's 26 million square foot mansion that has a helicopter pad, right? And the way he dresses and carries himself, I don't see a lot of modesty there. I see a great deal of false modesty, a lot of these the televangelist types. You know who was really good at the false modesty was Jim and Tammy Faye Baker. I don't know if you remember them from the 80s. I think it was the 80s or 90s. But boy, they could turn on the waterworks. They would be preaching and crying and God, I'm your servant and I'm your humble servant and work through me. And he was tears flowing down his face. And Tammy Faye, when she did it, was grotesque because she wore so much eye makeup and eyeliner, was all just black gunk oozing down her face as she cried. She cried these tears of, oh God, and you're this and that. And they would so humiliate themselves on television, and people ate it up, and people sent them all this money because they were using humility. They were weaponizing humiliation, their own humiliation. They were humiliating themselves on television. It was an act, right? So again, false modesty, uh false piety, you're right. It was Epistefus in Greece with the big holes in his toga. So that Aristotle says to him, Epistefus, we can see your pride through the holes in your toga. Um, yeah, so you'll see that too. So keep an eye out for that too as you go through life, and as you go in your circles, or see what you see or encounter what you encounter. Um, And again, be on guard within yourself that you or something inside of you, your own ego, isn't weaponizing and exploiting humility and modesty and turning it into a a means for mystic pride or a means to judge others and so on and so forth. Okay. I don't see anybody leaving any more comments or questions. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today and for taking a few hours out of your Sunday. I hope you all have a great week ahead. And I hope to see you back next week. Take care. Have a great week. And as always, inferential peace. Take care, everyone. We'll see you next week. Bye bye.